Hi, I'm Shashank Bhargav, and you're listening to Three Things, the Indian Express news show. In this episode, we talk about the Delhi universities setting a new record for some of the highest cutoffs in the country. We will also take a quick look at the results of the 2020 French Open finals. But first, we talk about the Indian economy, which has been experiencing an unprecedented slowdown. Back in August, the government had released the data that showed that India's GDP growth contracted 23.9% in the April-June quarter. This was the lowest growth rate since India had started reporting quarterly data in 1996. August had also seen the output of India's 8 core sectors of infrastructure decline by almost 9%. These core sectors include coal, crude oil, natural gas, refinery products, fertilizers, steel, cement, and electricity. Though last month, that is September, there seemed to be a number of signs that things were improving. This is something that even the Reserve Bank of India spoke about last week. To talk about these signs and how optimistic we should feel about them, we spoke to Udit Mishra, who writes on the economy for the Indian Express. And he first discusses what these signs of improvement were.
So in September, we got a lot of heartening news on the economic front. For example, after contracting for 6 months on the trot, India's exports finally turned around and they grew in September. The pace of growth was subdued. It was just over 5%. But the fact that the exports turned around was a significant event.
Similarly, Udit says, there was also good news from the automobile sector. There was an increase in both car and two-wheeler sales. Maruti Suzuki, for example, registered a 34% increase in sales. Companies like Hyundai, Honda, and Mahindra saw growth as well. The automotive industry sector is important as it accounts for more than 7% of the country's GDP and supports more than 3.7 crore employment. But apart from these, there were other good signs as well.
On the government front, we saw GST revenues improve. We saw e-way bills, which sort of are a proxy of how much is the business activity happening across the country. They improve. We also found FASTag use, which is sort of used by cars using the tolls across the country, improvement in that data. And perhaps most significantly, the purchasing managers index for the manufacturing sector. Basically, this index captures how the companies are placing their orders in the manufacturing space, in the factory space. That shot up, and it shot up to a level which was the highest since January 2012.
That means it was the highest in over 8 years. This was a significant improvement. On Friday, the Reserve Bank of India, that is the RBI, also said that there was some encouraging signs of a business turnaround and that the economic activity could return to growth in the January-March quarter. In his statement, the RBI Governor Shaktikanta Das talked about some of these things that Udit has mentioned, along with some others.
For example, the total electricity demand, which are now more than what they were in February. So it's a sort of a roundabout way of saying that we are getting back to the normal mode. Things are normalizing. So just like demand for electricity, there was steel consumption seems to have come back to the same level. As I mentioned, GST and e-way bills. Similarly, PMI manufacturing has improved. And, even in the agriculture sector, sales of tractors, two-wheeler sales in the rural areas, and toll collection again, freight, traffic, all these things have sort of come back to the same level or thereabout where they were in February.
Udit says that there are, of course, other variables that are still struggling. But these good signs are an indication that things are not completely down and out, and the economy is not totally flat.
To be sure, the RBI governor did say that this year the economy will contract by 9.5%. And he expects that even in the second quarter, in the third quarter, the economy will continue to contract after the 24% contraction that we saw in the first quarter, although the rate of contraction would be slower. So we would contract at a slower rate in the second and third quarter. In the fourth quarter, the RBI governor and the RBI as an institution believes that you might see a mild growth.
Now, seeing all these positive indicators has led many to ask if the worst is over. And will things only go upwards from here? Especially considering that the government is relaxing restrictions more and more in an effort to boost economic activity. But Udit says that it is difficult to say with certainty what will happen.
Because COVID has disrupted not just the supply and demand in the market, which will take its own time to sort of recover, but it has also played with people's psyche. So a lot depends on how comfortable people are spending money.
Here, Udit breaks down the problem on the demand and the supply side.
Now, on the supply side, we are looking at high inflation right now, primarily because supply lines were broken. So, if you had onions or eggs or even other commodities which could not be transferred from area A to area B, the prices were high in area B because the lack of supply. Now, how soon can this be resolved will have to be seen. And if there is a surge of COVID cases again when the economy starts to open up, now we're talking about cinema halls being opened and restaurants being opened. Now, if there is a surge of cases again, even a slight surge of cases, people are likely to hold back. Supply lines are likely to again continue to be broken. So there is this one element that will determine what happens to supply.
On the demand side, Udit says, with job losses, salary cuts, and poor prospects, people are a little cagey about spending money.
And they are likely to be that way because the prospects are not very clear. It's very uncertain. So, on the demand side, what will matter is how open are people to spending more money. For our listeners, they can understand it better by sussing out how many of their friends are wanting to buy more phones, a car, or a house this festive season, and wanting to get started with life as if COVID is now a thing of the past. That will determine. So both on the supply and the demand side, there are many ifs and buts. But on the whole, given the fact that COVID now seems to be the rate of infection, the number of cases seems to be not increasing and is actually decreasing, even though it remains high, there is a certain sense of optimism that perhaps the worst is over.
Though Udit says that a lot will depend on the coming festive season. This period could again change our understanding of how quickly the economy will likely recover.
Right. So this is very crucial. Every year, obviously, the demand for the whole year, how we buy things, has a certain seasonality to it. And festive season, which we are currently in, with so many festivals across different religions, a lot of demand typically happens around this time. People tend to buy new cars, new homes, new phones, new clothes. And many of these purchases that happen now, say in terms of cars or homes or anything substantial, even say a fridge or washing machine, tends to then fuel the economy for the rest or for the next half or one full year because it has payments built into it.
This is the time when a lot of money flows in the market. People are making heavy purchases or going on vacations. All this is what supports businesses and other people's salaries.
So it is absolutely critical for many businesses and for the viability of a lot of businesses, both in the informal sector and in the formal sector, to figure out what happens in this festive season. Because you must understand, this is also discretionary spending. This is not about the festive season bump to overall demand is massively discretionary in nature. You can afford not to buy the house today, or you can afford to perhaps drive your car for one more year if you're not feeling comfortable with spending a lot of money on a new car. So it will totally depend. The rate at which we recover as an economy will depend a lot on how Indians see this festive season and whether they feel upbeat about spending more on new things, or is there a desire to hold back and keep money for a rainy day because the prospects are not as good. So it's in that space where the behavior of people will determine how quickly we recover from the COVID situation, from the downturn.
Dear listeners, sorry for this interruption, but before we move on to the rest of the show, I just wanted your quick attention. One of the big reasons people say they like this show is because it helps them understand the news better. It provides them with the context they need to see the bigger picture. And there is perhaps no other place that does that better than Indian Express's Explained section. We on Three Things refer to the section regularly, and it helps us make this show. If you're a regular reader of Indian Express, you know how useful the explained section can be, especially when you're looking for in-depth analysis by the right experts. You can log on to indianexpress.com/explained and access the coverage 24/7. Explained by Indian Express, where news that matters is explained by experts who know the subject. Now, back to the show. Next, we talk about Delhi University. Right now, the admission process for a number of colleges have begun. And this includes colleges under DU, that is the Delhi University, some of which are considered one of the most prestigious in India. Students from across the country look for getting admission in DU, the cutoffs for which are known to skyrocket each year. This year, however, the university's admission process has broken all previous records. This is because the Lady Shri Ram College for Women, also called LSR, has set a 100% cutoff for 3 of its programs. And many courses across colleges have more than 99% cutoffs. In this segment, Aranya Shankar, who writes on the Delhi University for the paper, joins us to talk about the reasons why the cutoffs are so high and how they affect students. Aranya, Delhi University cutoffs have been rising for a while now. Could you talk about what cutoffs looked like, say, 20 years or even 10 years ago?
So DU cutoffs have always been high, but 20 years back and 10 years back itself is a big difference. 20 years ago, the highest cutoff was still in their 80s. So if you wanted to, make it to the top DU colleges, you only needed like, say, in your mid 80s or late 80s to get into a prominent DU college. But I think over the last few years, and even I would say it has been about 10 years since we started seeing this 90s and above ka bracket. You need to get at least 90s. And in the last 5 or 6 years, more and more colleges are now demanding, especially the colleges in North Campus are demanding 95% and higher for at least the popular courses, which is what most people want to study. So there has been this shift, and a lot of it, in fact, has to do with the CBSE giving such inflated marks in the class 12th board exams, or some state boards also following suit, that we just seem to be touching these completely outlandish heights. But this has started some time ago. I think it was SRCC in 2010 or 11 which had a high 100% cutoff for BCom. But at that time, it was the first time it had happened, and everyone was shell shocked. But over the last 4 or 5 years, we've seen this become the norm now.
So, what are the cutoffs like this year, and which colleges have the highest cutoffs right now?
Yeah, so this year, of course, I think this is a record. In the history of DU, perhaps there has been no college ever that has released 100% cutoff in 3 courses, which this year we've seen LSR doing. Lady Shri Ram College has 100% cutoff for economics, psychology, and political science. And even their cutoffs for, say, like a BCom honors is just 99.75. Like most of their cutoffs are in the 99 range. And, as we'd reported, this is also a record in the sense that there are 30 courses across 63 DU colleges which have a 99 or a higher cutoff. So, that just kind of shows how well students these days are scoring in their class 12th exams, that even a 95, 96 is now not getting you anywhere. And for example, there are 5,500 students this year who gave the exams, who applied to DU, who got 100% mark, best of 4 marks. That is one of the reasons why we are seeing cutoffs like this. In the previous years, for the last 2 or 3 years, it was touching 99 and higher, but the 100% cutoff has, this has come after 5 years exactly. So it was in 2015 last that the cutoff had touched 100% for computer science in 2 colleges, College of Vocational Studies and Indraprasth College for Women. But it's after a gap of 5 years that we've seen it touch 100 again. and this time in 3 subjects.
So you mentioned that a large part of this has to do with how high students are scoring. But to understand this entire matter a little better, could you talk about how the colleges themselves decide what their cutoff is going to be?
Okay, so the first and the most important factor is how students have scored that year in their class 12th exams. Because DU cutoffs mean that in this case, supposing like they've announced a 100% cutoff for a certain subject, anybody and everybody who gets that 100% is eligible for admission. So once a student comes and says that I want admission in this course and I met your eligibility criteria of 100% best of all, the college cannot refuse it. So just by that, the colleges need to always keep the cutoffs a little high because there's always the fear of over admission. And since students are scoring so well, that becomes the most important criteria when deciding what the cutoff should be. So, how everyone else has performed is the main criteria. Of course, there are other things that the college keeps in mind. For example, its own experience, past experience with the cutoffs. Like Hindu College, for example, last year had the highest cutoff for political science at 99%. That was the highest cutoff across colleges and courses. And despite keeping it 99%, they had over admission. So playing safe by keeping it a little higher is usually how the colleges will go. And the class 12th performance is one major factor. And CBSE happens to be that because I think a huge percentage, I would say about 70%, if not more, of students each year who apply to DU are from CBSE board. So their percentages affect DU cutoffs a lot. Then there are certain state boards, like Tamil Nadu board, for example, is notorious for giving inflated marks. And in certain colleges like SRCC, the Shriram College of Commerce, there's a huge influx we've seen in the last couple of years of students from Tamil Nadu. So their board exam marks will again determine the cutoff for that college. The college knows that they will get a lot of students from this board, and so they need to keep it at 100. That is one thing. And as I said, over admission is another criteria. No college would want a completely skewed student teacher ratio. So even if they have to keep very high cutoffs in the first list, they would rather do that than admit double or triple the number of seats that are available. And this time, I would also say that, like the Hindu college principal was saying, that this is a completely new admission process. Since COVID has struck, students are not going to be allowed in colleges, and the entire process is now moving online. So there is also that apprehension of, whether teachers and colleges who have to manage these admissions, will they be okay if there's a sudden rush of students on the first day online, because it's a new system that they will have to deal with. So that caution is also playing in. They would rather not have a huge rush of students in the first list and get more accustomed to the list and see, which is why most principals have said that the second list will be a better reflection of due stand in terms of the cutoffs.
So you talked about certain boards being much more lenient in giving marks, like the Tamil Nadu State Board. And on the other hand, you have ICSC, which is supposed to be stricter than CBSE. And you also have, say, the West Bengal State Board, which is known to be stricter. So are students who have given exams under boards that aren't as liberal in giving marks at a clear disadvantage then?
Yes, of course. They're going to be at a complete disadvantage because in DU, nothing counts except your board percentage. There is no other marker or there's no other criteria to get admission. There are no entrance tests. I mean, there are certain courses which hold entrance tests both in undergraduate and postgraduate admissions, but overall, most UG admissions are based on cutoffs. So there's a direct link. If you've not scored well enough in your class 12th boards, and as I said again, CBSE being the main board from where students of DU end up applying, that board determines to a large extent what the cutoff for DU will be. And anybody in boards except these who are not scoring as well will be at a disadvantage.
So, with things being unfair for students from these boards, do we see this eventually leading to all boards becoming more lenient?
That could be one way of looking at it, and it is possible that that might happen. But consecutive years of experience have shown us that not all boards are doing that. Some tend to still be stricter, and some are not so strict. So, as long as this kind of inequality in marking continues, I mean, there are voices, including from the Dean of Admissions and DU, who has been saying for the last couple of years that CBSE needs to first change how it's marking its students. Why is it that it's so easy for anyone to score 100%, even in social science subjects, in English? That's happening. And I think there is a general move towards holding entrance tests. But in DU's case, the question then arises, there are lakhs of applicants. This time, there were 3.53 lakh applications. I mean, is it logistically possible to hold entrances for such a huge number? So, there's a question mark there. But I would imagine that more than the other boards becoming lenient, there will be much more of a push for an entrance-based exam in DU entrance.
And with so many people applying to the Delhi University, more than 3.5 lakh applicants this year, is it a clear indication that there aren't as many well-reputed colleges that students can go to study?
Yeah, I think that is a no-brainer. I mean, even though DU has around 60 to 63 colleges, undergraduate colleges, it's usually the top 10 or 15 which, when you think of Delhi University, those are the colleges: the Hindu, SRCC, Miranda House, Hansraj. These are Ramjas, and of course LSR. These are the colleges that come to your mind. All the off-campus colleges, even the South Campus colleges, are not as well known. Somehow they are not making it to the top 10, 15, 20 list. And I would say there's a perception problem that most students who want to come to Delhi University want to flock to these colleges, and there just aren't enough seats. I mean, for 3.5 lakh applicants, there are 70,000 seats in DU. So that is obviously going to be a problem.
So then, in what way do we see these kind of high cutoffs affecting students? And, if you don't have such high marks, what options are you left with?
So, one would like to say that they should wait for subsequent cutoff lists to come, because DU has in the recent years released about 6 or 7 cutoff lists before they completely close admissions. And in many courses and colleges, sometimes the seats still remain vacant. So there is a slight possibility, but for a college that is giving a cutoff of 100%, it's not going to, even on the 6th or 7th list, it's quite impossible for the cutoff to come down by more than, say, 2 or like 3% maximum. If you haven't, scored above 90, for example, I mean, even if you score above 90, there isn't much of a chance that you would make it into a college that is giving a cutoff of 100%. But there are colleges out of the North Campus, there are South Campus colleges, there are colleges which are called off-campus colleges, which don't fall in any campus, but still affiliated to DU, where students can take admissions, and for which cutoffs may come down to at least, I would say, the mid 80s for many courses. So the trick is to secure admission wherever you're getting right now, if you want to stick to Delhi University, and wait for subsequent cutoff lists to see whether you made it or not, because it's always possible to cancel your seat in one college and shift to the next. But for those who are absolutely not making it to any of the lists even now and are worried about getting admissions, there are universities in Delhi which have an entrance-based system or have lower cutoffs. For example, Jamia is there. Jamia's courses are entrance-based, so one can apply to Jamia Millia Islamia. Ambedkar University, Delhi, which is a state university, it's very reputed, especially for liberal arts. They usually have a mix of an entrance and cutoff percentage, and their cutoffs are not as high. So, one can always apply there. Plus, Delhi students especially have a certain quota there. So that is one option. And of course, I think those who are moneyed, who have the resources, will always have the option of the OP Jindal and Ashoka University, where cutoffs don't make any difference. You get through an entrance. So they always have the option. I think it's the lower middle classes or the lower classes which are going to suffer the most through these cutoffs. And for them, the options are actually severely limited. There's no other way of saying it.
And in the end, we talk about the results of the 2020 French Open, the Grand Slam tennis tournament played on outdoor clay courts. This year's final, which took place yesterday, was played between Rafael Nadal, number 2 in men's singles tennis, and world number 1 Novak Djokovic. In the game, however, Nadal demolished Djokovic without dropping a set and won his 13th French Open. This win has led Nadal to tie with Roger Federer for the all-time record of 20 Grand Slam titles. During the game, Djokovic failed to find any rhythm in the first two sets, and even though he put up a dogged fight, all the important points went to Nadal. Djokovic found his way back in the third set and even managed to nose ahead, but Nadal broke him again after 2 hours and 30 minutes of what was one of the greatest clay court performances of all time. For Djokovic, the defeat ended his hopes of an 18th slam and of becoming the first man since Rod Laver in 1969 to win all 4 majors twice. For Nadal, this was his 100th win at the Roland Garros against just 2 defeats since his 2005 debut. You were listening to 3 Things by the Indian Express. Today's show was written and produced by me, Shashank Bhargav, and as always was edited and mixed by our producer Joshua Thomas. Before we go, here's another reminder to check out Indian Express's Explain section. You can log on to indianexpress.com/explain and find in-depth analysis by the right experts. It has everything you need to know to understand the news better and see the bigger picture. If you like this show, then you can subscribe to us wherever you get your podcasts. You can also recommend the show to someone you think will like it, share it with a friend or someone in your family. It's the best way for people to get to know about us. You can also tweet us at Express Audio and write to us at podcast@indianexpress.com.